They write up, they put some writing and such, they write it, they don't report. So whether that's kind of like, I want to do the touching inside of the day, if you take away people just look at this, so it's not you can look at it, so
part of the other fundamentality of it is
we'll get you to relax. Do feel free to keep eating and drinking. And we're going to have lots of time for chatting afterwards as well.
Yes. Sorry.
Very.
I'm almost at the end.
Oh,
Is that the sequential order?
you can sit at the center if you like.
I don't know yet.
Tracy.
Thanks for
It's a really old soap
I know. I couldn't tell. I know. Just thinking, I know it's also
It's all very
close.
yeah. Where do you look?
I'm sorry.
Right. And also,
It should crack.
my legs in like
Do you
a
want
straight out.
to move this back a bit?
No, I'm grabbed. It's okay.
Can we move? Are you sure? Because the legs.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I've been in
we'll move
worse
it.
positions.
I know, but there's no kid here today, so there's no
Right.
kid. You got it.
Grab the end and we'll just lift it up.
Slightly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well done.
Oh, that's much better. Yeah, this is a lot better, right? Your legs are better.
Yeah.
That's what you do at play dates, not here.
No.
Okay.
That's what that is.
Let us get going. Thank you very much for coming. Much appreciated. It's very exciting to be back in Brisbane for the second of the Women in Development Network events with the Queensland International Development Network partners. And we're delighted and going to be doing some more work in the future. So we have 3 speakers tonight, and I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land where we work and live, pay our respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are here today. Here we're on the land of the Turrbal and Jagera peoples, and I come from the land of the Camaragal people of the Eora Nation. Sovereignty never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So, thank you for coming. We are here to hear about new technologies in the aid development and humanitarian sector, and mainly because they are impacting right the way across the sector. There isn't a job that will not be impacted in some way or another, and there are so many different aspects to this. Every speaker that we have here and interstate are all looking at it from a different perspective. So we have 3 fabulous speakers, and we're going to start off with Tracy Shields. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a little bit about each. I know that you've all looked at their bios online, and you can also grab them and have a chat to them again afterwards as well. But I'll start off with Tracy. We'll have a little bit from Tracy about the work that she does in technology, and then we will have 1 question. And then at the end, after everyone does the same, there'll be loads of questions, and we can, and then finally we can have some more to chat, some more to eat. And again, one of the key parts of the evening is networking. For those who don't know me, I'm Chris Franks. I'm the chair of Women in Development. A huge passion for women and making sure that women in the sector have the opportunity to think about senior roles, to have support through mentoring, through access to information, and to end up as CEOs and directors. One of the things that I realised many years ago was that there was a lot of money and a lot of information in the corporate sector, but it wasn't getting through. So that's why we're here. We're here to share information. And our mentoring program is now extremely popular, and we want to make sure that women get involved. So we love to see you here. We'll have events where there are 40, and we'll have events where there are 10, and all of them are great because it means that you're meeting others. So, Tracy, Plan International Australia Senior Advisor for Child Rights and Protection. Been working with Child Fund on a project focusing on online safety in the Pacific. And as we all know, Plan is an organisation that focuses on a world where girls can take their rightful place as equals. And Tracy's been involved in this work for over 15 years. and was previously the Global Technical Lead for Protection from Violence with Plan International Global. So over to you, Tracy. Thank you.
Thanks. Yay. Oh, it's like the first time I've done 3 years. Well, first of all, it's actually a really special, it's actually a really special evening to be involved in anything that's to do with kind of women or girls, because for us at Plan tomorrow is, I don't know if you know, it's International Day of the Girl. So it's the 10th anniversary of International Day of the Girl tomorrow. So it's going to be like it's a really busy week for us, but it's also that really lovely acknowledgement, right? Like focusing on what's coming up to the future. So when you said, you know, do you want to be involved? I was like, yes, I think there's something happening there. I was like, oh yes. So yeah, I work with Plan. I'm their child rights and protection advisor. I am not an IT guru. I know nothing about online. I do not have a digital background. If your question is that way inclined, I'll take it as a question on notice and research it on Google and come back to you tomorrow. But what I do know about is kind of the real importance of, I guess, basing programs in research, basing programs in the reality of the places that we work, the reality for the girls and the boys that we work with, and making sure we develop programs that can try and go beyond 3 years with an evidence base behind them. So I know that bit, particularly for child protection. So yeah, we're working on an online safety project in the Solomon Islands. It is based in research, which was in 2020. It was actually between October 2019 to March 2020. If you're familiar with anything over the last 3 years, I'm sure you can put together that was probably one of the last like massive pieces of research we could do on this. And we went through Kiribati, through Papua New Guinea, noticing my Papua New Guinea link here, and also through the Solomon Islands. And it was the first research of its type to really look at children, parents, and stakeholders and say, what is the digital world looking like for you? What are the things you're concerned about online? What are the gaps, and what can a program that looks at digital literacy do to help you? I've got to say, knowing that there are people who are probably much more based in research than me, qualitative, small sample size, no prevalence data, please take it with a pinch of salt, but it gave us that really good bones on what to do to go forward. Now, I have worked in cyber safety and child protection for a while, and normally the issues that come up are human trafficking, exploitation, abuse, and interestingly enough, through these country contexts, they weren't the main things that were coming through. So the main things were things like cyberbullying, hacking, inappropriate content, particularly from parents recognizing that their youth were starting to access inappropriate content, whether on purpose or accidental, and also this concept of kind of harmful influences, so what you were seeing online and how that could be impacting your day-to-day life. So the bigger issues that we might think that you might have normally framed a child protection online digital program weren't really there. So it was really important critical information to focus on, I guess, the lived reality for children in those contexts. And recognise what they do use the internet for. The Solomon Islands, where I work, the kids were saying actually it's really important for us in our faith to be using online access to read scripture or read what's come out from the churches. So that's a really interesting angle that tells you straight away, great, if we're going to be doing any kind of digital literacy, let's make sure we're involving faith leaders. So little kind of nuggets of information through that was really important. The overall perception, though, we know girls are more at risk to violence, to bullying, to any of the bad things that we tend to see on the internet, but also that they're not strong enough to deal with it. So it wasn't just recognizing they were more likely than their males to see this, but also they are, the quotes like, you know, they're not strong, they can't cope, they won't be able to do this. So what happens is that space gets constricted by parents. And all the value of being online, the seeking of information on menstrual health, hygiene and management, on education, on questions that you might want to ask, that gets restricted because the parents in the community are like, no, not only are they more at risk, they're not going to be able to cope with it. And the girls were also saying that to us. So it was really important that we sort of were dealing with those kind of ideas. And also on the converse side, it was always, oh, the boys in our communities are always the perpetrators, as opposed to recognizing on the internet, you're often talking to people you don't know. So there was a lot of kind of maybe backlash to boys, and they might, you know, it wasn't them necessarily. So we had to really be working off the social norms that were existing for both genders as well. So I should say from the outset, we actually work really closely with Child Fund Australia. Rachel Turner, I don't know where I got that from, that's like a 20-year-old name. April Turner I work with is with Child Fund Australia. She's actually based in the Gold Coast, so there are a few of us kind of up here in Queensland. We work with my phenomenal Plan Solomon Islands colleagues, who I am here in Brisbane, but I can talk to you about it. but Judy and Bobby are like the heart and soul of the work, right? They're the ones who go out there and get the graft done every single day. And we're funded through DFAT, through both their ANCP, which is their pot of money to charities, and also through CCTCP, which you'll love to look up yourself because I can never remember. It's like cyber training and corporation partnership, but interestingly enough, it's gone from like $4 million a year funding to 74, I think, over the last 10 years. So it's really getting huge. So 2 different arms of DFAT. We work in Honiara. We've also just started working with Malita. We work with Child Fund's Swipe Safe curricula. So they have a curricula they're using in Vietnam, which is great. If it's going to work in the Sols, you need to contextualize it. And I say the biggest thing of why our digital work is working is because we contextualize it to the Solomon Islands, to the girls, to the boys, to the parents. The parents, by the way, all did research, like, we need to know what do we do with our kids? Like, they're going online and I don't know what to do. We're like, great, okay, you need a separate curricula. We can't just have the youth one. And with communities and stakeholders. Both it is really important. How do you work with churches? So we kind of do, I guess, what's called the socio-ecological model of child protection or children's rights, child at the centre. Who are those circles of influence around that? And how do we make sure the digital literacy is through a golden thread that's kind of through all of their work? So we train youth facilitators. They're the ones who deliver the Swipe Safe curricula. We train parents in the specific curricula on how they can provide safe access to the internet, recognizing it is a really important place. And we work with churches and schools to hopefully start getting their first ever online safety policy for a school and a church. There isn't a national legislation on online safety in Solomon Islands, so that's kind of like a really longer term goal of how do you support Plan Solomon Islands, Dreamcast, all of these great entities in country to actually advocate for their governments to say, we can't be using other legislation and a loophole to talk about cyberbullying. How do we get this as our own legislation? So we really work from a socio-ecological model. What I've also loved about it is we listen to the feedback. We weren't meant to work in Malita, but the youth were like, yeah, cool, work in Honiara. Malita's quite far away. Like, is it going to work if you go rural? Great question. Let's try it. So we've actually just had our Malita training, which I think has gone, seems like it's gone pretty well. And the youth like, this is great. It's a great online curriculum. Can we have it as an app? And it's one of those simple things like, yep. Yeah, you absolutely should have this digital literacy as an app. That's a really good contextualized to your country. So it's really great. We can also be part of a program that's looking at online safety, but contextualizing it and adapting as well. And yeah, Solomon Islands will be having their own International Day of the Girl on 18th and 19th of October. And talking to my colleagues today, they're having a big breakfast in the morning where they've got Ministry of Women, Ministry for Comms and Aviation, Ministry for Social Welfare, and the youth that were trained, where the youth come up and the first thing after the acknowledgements is the youth saying what they're thinking about online safety in the Sols, and the government a chance to respond and what will happen from the actions after that. So I emailed Chris because I think I sat there for weeks going, I don't really do anything to do with digital or online. I'm like, you do, Tracy. You're a child protection person, but this is such a bigger world that it's moving into. And hopefully from your giggles, it sounds like we are doing it. So it's a great project. It is down purely to Judy and Bobby and the youth. And I'm really lucky enough to be here and kind of tell you a little bit about it, because obviously they're not here. So that's a bit about our work.
So one question to start you off. How did you get into this? How did you get to be where you are now? Is this a job that you immediately thought as soon as you left school? So what's the journey to get you here?
When there's a week where you go and train and you do job placement. I did it as a vet, and I painted on those days. So that was really not what I was going to be doing. My dad's worked in international development for many years, through Papua New Guinea and Brisbane, Longvaroka, and also through the Pacific, through Vanuatu, but very much in the health management side. I started off in government in Canberra doing a grad program, and I was always fighting against what I was brought up with, the values of equality, of everyone deserving a chance to get their chance on, but my dad was so much of an influence. And sorry, he's been a bit sick lately, he's fine. But my dad is one of the people who he can walk into a room in any country and he just wants to make sure that people are deserving of their rights. And for years I was like, I don't want to work in that area. And then I ended up in Papua New Guinea. I went to Goroka where my father used to work. And from there, it kind of happened. And I ended up in child protection because violence against children happening is hard. And I saw it a lot, and I thought, I can't not do this as a piece of work. And I always conclude this by saying, I would love to be a chef. I actually always wanted to be a chef. Come to my restaurant when I open at the age of 60, but for now, while this is happening in the world, this is my mission, this is what I want to do, and I want to make sure that I work with people in countries so that this thing doesn't exist. And my dad and the path and the mission. And now I cry events.
Thank you. Absolutely wonderful. Okay, so Sarah is an entrepreneur, driving change through stories, the co-founder and CEO of Folktale, which is a technology platform with a mission to transform how global organisations approach storytelling so that they can monitor, evaluate and communicate their impact.
Thank you.
Sarah.
Thanks, Chris. That was wonderful, Tracy. That was awesome. So really glad to be here, and also would like to acknowledge the terrible and dead people today. And if you asked me 12 years ago, would I be actually running my own company? I'd say absolutely not. I don't know what I'm doing, right? In terms of how did you actually build a technology company? And so I might just really quickly go back to the beginning as to like what brought me here in the first place. Prior to going into global development, because that's what I formally trained and was in Canada, where I'm originally from, I spent a decade in the disability sector. So working in disability and working across a big model around particularly autism spectrum disorder. And back then it's really changed. So I was like, this is great, but you know, I just wanted to learn more because I guess I was always curious. So traveled around the world, had a chance to meet incredible folks, and worked across a lot of psychiatrists and realized that, you know, in order to talk about disability, you have to talk about international public health. There's a lot of different layers in terms of the conversation. So I had a choice, and there's always this crossroad in your life when you're looking at your career. I had a choice of coming to UQ, Sweden, London, or the United States, and I chose UQ. So here I am. So I came from my Master's in International Public Health, thinking this is fantastic. I'm going to add complexity to my work that I already have in disability. And during my time as a postgraduate study student, I had a chance to work in Geneva at WHO. It was a great opportunity, a 6-month stint. And it was actually there that actually opened my eyes even further, because I was working in the inaugural World Report on Disability and International Public Health here, as well as in Geneva. And then I started working in the Grotto, which is the Media and Communications Department. And there you have all these folks, intersections of journalists and public health practitioners and everyone. And I was like, how did you get into this? And that was the first time I saw storytelling. Storytelling in terms of how you actually communicated the lived experiences of people around the world through their stories. And so I got a chance to work with these practitioners, and I was like, this is fantastic. There's this intersection of how we can communicate, how we can demonstrate impact, but also how we can humanize that through visual storytelling. So fast forward, I had a chance to work globally in vector-borne disease control programs, the privilege of working across some wonderful, wonderful DFAT funded programs. And I think there was a moment where I jumped ship, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna try and build my own company, because at that time I was 6 months pregnant, and I thought if I don't do it now, then I'm not going to do it at all. So married in Australia, by the way, skip the cards. And here I am. So I was only supposed to be here for 18 months, and here I am 12 years later. So first pregnancy, I thought I'm going to start my first company, right? Pretty daring. Right? You probably always get a job. High risk, high reward. And so that first one was this documentary studio. So my husband is a filmmaker, and I'm in global development. So one of our first programs was with global development programs, how to communicate your impact in a really simple way, connect those who are desperately wanting to hear the impact on the ground with those who want to share the impact. So that documentary studio, called the Story Boxes, thrived. Our team worked around the world with UNICEF, DFAT projects, we traveled like incredibly well. But the problem is there's an ethics of who's responsible for telling that story, right? There's an ethics behind why are we, as filmmakers, there's nothing wrong with it, but going into communities in Pakistan and Myanmar, across the Pacific, just you name it, our team has been mobilized Why are we the ones taking the stories? And also there's an element of the dangers of a single story, as well as the cost, the efficiencies, just how do you actually scale that? So we went back in and started innovating within the storybooks. And then we're like, there's this incubator. Yeah, let's apply. And Folktale came to life. So Folktale has been building for many, many, many years. And it's a combination, it's a technology platform. So if you were to ask me, am I gonna build a tech platform? I'm not a technical founder, but I think technology is not technology, just people. It's just people behind the scenes building the right features in order to humanize what you're doing. Good tech you see bad tech as well. And you can see some really bad tech globally with some of the media platforms and social media that we use. So again, look behind the scenes and see what tech is, being built. So what was great about this is that we were innovating within our previous company and self-sustaining and funding Folktale as we kept growing. So then while we were working with the DFAT program with our other company, long story short, we were working within the Innovation Exchange Fund, and now it's not here anymore. But at that time, Louise Payne was like, we need to build a culture of storytelling. We need to understand what's actually happening across all the programs. The way we communicate through cables and reports is really arduous. We need a more human way of seeing the gray matter, the really difficult things that are happening. And for us, stories is what we all connect with. It's the telling and retelling of information, which is how we define. So at Folktale, we actually work right now. We tested it around 90 countries and working in some of the most remote communities in the world to make it as accessible as possible. And the goal really is to drive change through inclusive storytelling, shifting power, and being able to empower communities to share their own voices through mobile devices or any technology you have. There's no app, it's a web-based platform so that people can use it no matter what. But story for story's sake is just okay, right? So the way that we communicate story at Folktale is 4 different ways. And the value is often seen as story for communication, which is really important to be able to humanize and tell all of the different activities that are happening within programs. We also see story as a data collection tool with qualitative insights, being able to connect further, like the funders with the programs, being able to humanize at scale without necessarily anyone going in and sharing the story. So it's templatized, there's actual guidance, because we realize it's not actually the lack of stories, it's the lack of guidance on what to say, who you're sharing it with. It's all of the things before you share the story. So we look at it as communications, as data collection. We also use Folktale as a method within any of the methodologies within your theory of change. So we work with a lot of MEL and communications and programs, but we see the biggest magic when all of these programs and departments work together, because often, MEL is really technical. You've got a lot of information that you need, a lot of evaluation, but often, how do you communicate that back to the stakeholders that matter? How do you actually demonstrate the impact alongside the financials and everything that's happening? And then finally, also, Folktale is an insights tool, which is really exciting, which is only at the tip of the iceberg. Because what happens now is, yes, you can have lots of stories, and we're the antithesis of TikTok as an example, right? So you can effectively have lots of noise out there, or you can have consideration, intent, and purpose, build it for a particular reason, and then share it with the right audiences that are looking to share it or to listen. So as an insights tool, there's a lot of things like machine learning, all this fancy stuff that's happening behind the scenes. The final thing that I'm going to share is, once again, going back, technology is people. So when we're talking about some of the things that Tracy talked about, we're often thinking about not the buttons and the features, but it's actually safeguarding the ethics, consent, privacy. We're thinking about all those things and actually what it means to honor our main stakeholder, which are the storytellers. So yes, we work with a lot of local development folks, but how do you actually honor communities that are sharing their story, that they feel empowered and that's not extracted? And that's a big journey. There's a lot of mistakes along the way. But I think that's just a little bit about what we're doing with some of our programs.
It's huge. So my question for you is, what did you start off doing? You started off telling us that you were in disability. Is that what was the first step out of studies?
No, my first step was commerce. So I went to University of Toronto, right? Right. So this is great. The chef journey is on my cards too. Maybe coffee. But I did commerce at University of Toronto, and then I also did a hybrid with sciences and psychology, behavior change, was really interested in. And then from there moved into international public health here at UQ, and then have been asked to do a postdoc, but I've said no a million times. So that's my journey.
Wonderful. Okay. And again, an example of you don't actually end up where you thought you might. Fantastic. Dr. Anne Tran, humanitarian engineer. Love that title. CEO and co-founder of Future Equal. So I can see a link coming up.
I
here.
know. Yes,
To all of our restaurants.
So a social enterprise that improves health, gender equality and the environment with smart electric cooking services and smart data for schools, and refugee programs in developing countries.
Thank you very much, Chris and Joel, for inviting me here. We want to acknowledge the traditional owners that we are meeting. I am feeling a bit of a fraud here because as an engineer, I wish I had your background because of the failures I've made thinking technology was the answer. Right, so I began in my life as a chemical engineer with a focus on water, and I was talking to Leah over here, who is a water expert from Engineers Without Borders, which is my first dream job that I got. So I started thinking that I could help save the world, make it better through tech solutions. And that was a huge failure because when you go in a community and you bring a solution that's just purely tech without considering people, then it's always going to fail. And I have been a part of a few projects where I thought that was the solution, and I realized very quickly that people are the challenge. The easiness of tech is just there. It just turns off and on, flick off and on, done. But the surrounding context of social, political, legal, community, social aspect is key. So one of the really key examples was I was working in Cambodia as a volunteer, and one of the projects we're looking at was clean water systems for communities. And we had a ceramic water filter, which is pretty much like a flower pot, but it has silver lining that acts as an antibacterial agent. I went to the community on a floating village, and I was saying, and one of the communities had a cracked filter. And I said, oh, why don't you replace it? It's just $2. And they go, oh, I'm not quite sure why. And they pulled out his phone, and he called his wife on another mobile phone, which probably costs $10 a month to maintain. And it's just $2 to change. But the technology, without the education, without the information, without the connection to health and saving money because you're not sick and being able to work, wasn't there. It was just purely just this technology that we planted into a community without valuing the connection to people. And so I just thought, so that's what it is, a connection from technology to people, to education, to awareness. And so as an engineer, it was like a bit of a shock, thunderbolt moment where I'm like, oh, the holy grail of education. So I came back to Australia, and I worked with Engineers Without Borders in an education program in which we taught engineers all across Australia and New Zealand, and that's grown into a mass program all over the world. That technology combined with appropriateness and community and cultural awareness makes a big difference. And I was 27 then, and I was talking to professors and higher ranking engineers and said, you're doing it all wrong, and this is how you're going to do it. And they were, I don't know, listening, which was just completely because I'm a young female engineer who had bright eye, thought we would do and change the world to a better place. And we had to start now, right? And it was a brilliant opportunity to do this and change some aspects of engineering and the technology behind it. And I must say that within the 2 years that I was there, we impacted 18,000 students across 26 universities in Australia and New Zealand. And it was just brilliant. And it was such an opportunity to educate the next generation of engineers who go out to international development projects that, hey, tech is not only the answer. We need to scaffold it in human-centered design and learn. So important. So I hear you both when you say that, you know, you're not from a technical background, but you're doing great things. And that's ultimately, I think, what engineers and scientists and technologists need to hear, that it's the people that matter, right? We need to care about the people. And so I've gone through a long journey where I thought tech was the answer, and I thought education was the answer. And I started working in research, doing development work, focusing on agriculture, using Internet of Things. I've got drones. I have DNA testing kits that look at water testing. I've done all this tech work, and so I ended up in Rwanda doing an energy project in a refugee community there. And I walked into a school kitchen, which was a huge pot of boiling water and they're cooking porridge. And I stood inside this hut, which is like a tin shed. And as I got in there, there were 3 chefs cooking on the fire, and the acrid smoke as I walked in. Just imagine putting your head in a campfire, staying there for like 5 hours cooking. And I just thought, how could people in the health impact of what we have still be cooking on biomass, cooking fiber and other things like that? And I knew that there were solutions there. But one of the key things about this problem was that the tech is there, but it's actually the political will of the large UN organizations to implement clean cooking for a community. And I was sitting as a researcher with the World Food Programme, and a bunch of researchers going, if only there were organizations that had a technical solution, that had financial understanding, that would be sustainable, that focused on education and job creation for community members. Oh, wouldn't that be great? And we went, yes. Then we carried on with our jobs. And that was 2 years ago, where I was sitting in this office and just thinking, this is what we need. And I came back to Australia, and COVID hit, and all these challenges. And the schools closed down, and there was no school feeding, so kids didn't get their 1 meal a day, which was really quite disheartening. And so I and our co-founder, Andrew Pascal, we developed, which is a social enterprise that looks at electric cooking or modern energy cooking for refugees and school settings. So they use a big giant pot, and we use a tech system, which is an Internet of Things device, to measure the impact that we're having, and to prove that it's actually being used well, and there's a maintenance and operational kind of side to it. The thing is that we have the tech ready, and one of the key things is the standardizations and making sure that what we implement in the community doesn't harm them. So I have a huge fear about creating a fire risk, and so I haven't implemented yet because I want to test it, make sure that it's top notch, and that we also have the community involved. Key to this is to have the community own the technology and understand it and work with it. So it's a slow process, and I thought I could change part of the world, but I also know that central enterprises are a long process, and I also have to feed my lovely children. So I have a beautiful job on the side with there's your Queensland in the international development team, and also that role is beautiful because it's about capacity building. It's not about us parachuting ourselves in and solving the problem. It's about capacity building, government officials, potential decision makers in communities, bringing them here and showing them what tech we have, what information, what kind of systems we have, and then contextualizing it from their point of view, their passions and what they need for their own country, to go back and actually implement these policies and changes. So I've kind of come full circle in the way I've developed my career, thinking tech's the answer, but actually in the end, it's people, capacity building, and not us parachuting ourselves in, but them developing themselves. So many mistakes, I'm telling you, the people of the world, don't follow me. Learn from me, learn from us now, and hopefully we'll be able to, leapfrog all these problems and just go, on making the world a better place. Thank you.
That sounds fantastic. And tell me, when you were looking at that initial spot, given that you're looking on the technical side, you know, one meal a day of porridge doesn't sound terribly helpful. Do you go further and look at how you can encourage them to cook other things?
So the great thing is that we've been, so in my previous role at Loughborough University, the electric cooking pot that we have not only cooks porridge, but it can cook a whole range of different food types. So locally produced vegetables can be put in the pot and actually add some nutrition. And so some of the programs that the World Vision are looking at, World Food Program is looking at, is actually improved nutrition and not just porridge. And that is key to saving money from, so biomass cooking is actually really expensive if you use charcoal and firewood, and it like sustain a refugee community with firewood costs millions per month, right? Extraordinary amount of, and not only costs of economic costs, but the environmental costs of cutting down firewood, and also the health costs of the people out there. So it's an extraordinary amount of cost and burden, particularly for women and children. One of the key things we did when we talked to these refugee communities was ask, what did they prioritize? What was their focus on? And many of the decision makers and men wanted electrification. All the women I asked said cooking, not, and ultimately, I don't want to divide the genders. We can combine electric cooking and electric cooking to push the agenda of health for women and children if we just combine those two agendas together. Electrification gets funded 100 times more. It's incredible the difference. And I don't think people understand that decision makers aren't women, right? And this is a women, it's a gendered issue. And that's what I think we need to think about when we do development, right? It's not, it's the lens you sit on. And when I told this lovely community that this is what we would like to focus on, and they're like, wow, an engineer, a woman with a focus on women issues. And that is really key to changing some aspects of it.
Absolutely, so true. Thank you, fantastic. But the thing that impresses me about all of you, incredible passion. So much passion that drives all of you into really innovative programs. So, over to you for your questions to these three very impressive ladies.
And what were your piloting programs? Is it in Rwanda where you kind of had that experience or order?
So for my the social enterprise that I'm developing, we're looking at partnering with engineers like this in Cambodia. World Food Program have done pilots in Lesotho. They've got one in Kenya, and they've got a number of different projects around in Tanzania. So they're piloted in. So they're large cookers. They're piloting schools, refugee settlements. So, what are you interested in?
Oh, I was thinking more like specific to PNG and places like that.
It's a huge problem in the Pacific, but the challenge is that to make it sustainable and economically feasible, collecting firewood for free doesn't offset the cost of the electricity. And so what we're, as a business, the most important thing is to kind of demonstrate that it actually saves money more than health. And so in an urban setting where they pay for charcoal, we've demonstrated that charcoal is 5 times more expensive than using electricity. And people don't understand the context, because electricity is just something that comes from the ether, right? Yeah. But when you go and buy a bag of firewood, you pay that cost every day and you don't notice the cost. So it's 5 times cheaper. And once people see that, like, oh, maybe I should use this electrical, and it's cleaner and faster and more efficient. Like the understanding of technology, but put into data, and a data that people understand, okay, money saved makes a big difference. And so people will convert and change their habits when they can see what benefits them.
Kind of lends onto And this is one of these things where I've not networked for like 3 years, right? And all of a sudden, I'm like, oh my gosh, we was talking about story time and play, we're doing like early childhood stories in the Pacific. I'm like, why have I not even before? In Cambodia, with World Food Programme and our school feeding programme, we're also using Stephanie Alexander's kitchen garden model, Trojan horse and gender. And we're using a kitchen garden to talk about like, what are traditional gender norms, like boys can cook as well. And all of a sudden I'm speaking to you going, wow, if you had what you do along with kind of a curriculum in the school that talks about, you know, the girls.
Chris is going, this is why we have this network.
You know, kind of sipping, and it's just so interesting. All these layers come through, right? Yeah.
It's a strength of women in development. We're changing the world.
And dedicated men.
Absolutely. You were next.
Yeah, so my question is to all three of you. There's different ways that I think storytelling can be used either for trying to influence small groups or trying to influence large groups to get your message out. What are some of the effective ways that you've found in your three different areas of doing either whichever you feel more comfortable speaking about?
I think it's suicide.
And it's broad.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. That's why I'm just like, okay, like if we were to look at just the lens here, in terms of the Gates note released like a Gates note, and there was a Gates note number 9 that said mobile devices are most powerful in the hands of course women. And so that launch pad us to build folks out, right? I think that the most effective ones, I think, has been when people really want to be heard and want to share, when it's not an extractive process versus like, just say this so that I can put it on the report. So I think it's not just a storytelling, it's also a connection between the supply and demand. Are you sharing? Are you listening? Are you going to do something with it? So I actually think it's a bit more considered than just a storytelling, of which we're looking at that combined network together.
And do you find those ones to be the most impactful with other stakeholders and sharing?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's not just one single. And I think everyone alluded to it, right? Like for us, there's so much work behind the scenes that happens with regards to intent, purpose, where is it going? Like a lot of the work, even before the story is shared, how people feel safe, trusted. Unless all of that is actually defined and understood through a technology platform, then no, what's the value of that sharing?
I think as well can push you into uncomfortable spaces, which is good. Like you should be listening to the bad feedback.
Yeah.
You should be saying, yeah, you're right. And like you first started like really notice all these different things. So kind of that community participation loop. And I was with World Vision at the point where, you know, sponsorship I used to have happening, getting totally extractive, right? Like it was bring 50 kids in. Do you like, you skip? Great, cool. How old are you? Great, cool. Okay, sign here, send it to your sponsor's happy, right? Like it was like, there was nothing win-win about it. And World Vision started redesigning the sponsorship journey from the point of view of the child. You probably know now the children like choose their sponsors, and okay, there's lots to be said about sponsorship, etc. But they were there with like, okay, let's tell the story of that sponsored child, and then we would work out like a roadmap. You'd sit down with the child for the time and go, what does your day look like? Sometimes that day looked like child labor. Sometimes that day looked like, you know, I'm not at school, or I'm a teenage mother, and by the way, yeah, give a digital device to a young pregnant woman in Afghanistan, if they could all have that. But you know, suddenly the storytelling aspect, which is really important, can push you into some really uncomfortable spaces, and you need to sit with it, acknowledge it, and solve it with those people who are telling you the story. I think that's the other really big thing. Like it's having the space to say, yeah, you're right, and let's take them, and how can we change that as well? But it can make it really more powerful. The sponsorship journey totally transformed for World Vision because they were learning more about their sponsor child, and the kids were getting a lot more out of it. How it's evolved is really, really interesting as well in terms of that sponsorship relationship and children choosing their sponsor and that difference in the power stakeholder. I mean, yeah, that kind of, and that's all from the storytelling. It's their point of view and their, you know, their story to tell.
First of all,
I was wondering, have you looked at housing practitioners?
Yes, we have, and we have started. Our experience is we're a long way away from actually doing something that can be understood by all. So we're working with a few, but I think that there's a lot more learning that we have to do as a company in order to understand some of the Indigenous practices that we need to set from governance through to everything that we have as a company. I think there's a lot of questions around basic things like consent and privacy, as well as deceased members. How do we actually withdraw some of the information? We're having those big discussions right now as an organization and the company, because I think a lot of the practices, we have to do it just as table stakes. So table stakes meaning they just have to be just foundational things that are part of a technology platform. That often, rather than it being nice to have, we actually lean into some of the harder stuff now. We're not there yet, but the answer is we're working with, not and trying to understand some of the aspects that we do. So I don't know. That's a long-winded way of saying we are, but not well yet, and we're learning.
My name is Elizabeth. I'm originally from PNG, and I think, in the group, I'm probably the only one from like developing certain countries. So
I'm from Fiji.
I'm
another island.
I said you with, I'm just like grateful to the work that you do for humanity, if anything, and especially the influence your father, Tracy. I don't know, I'm just amazed. You raised you well. I can sort of, just agree with the presentation to, you put forward that each country, like we have our development challenges, but I think the most vulnerable ones still fall on the women and children. And, to give them that helping hand, it's a lot of challenge. We've got to have the political buy-in. We've got to have the community buy-in. We've got, to teach them and sort of, hold their hands to. And it's a long process and it's tedious. And I'm just like, I want to say how grateful I am to, to the work that you three ladies do. And I'm sure, there are other people who also do that. And I'm also happy that I'm in this audience now. And it's just uplifting for me. So I thought, I'd share this with you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Another question.
I have a question for Tracy, actually. I'm curious to know, with your background in child protection and working internationally as well, how did you must have heard some pretty horrific stories over your time. How do you deal with that? Feeling totally overwhelmed, like you have to quit.
You don't, and you are only like you don't, and you need to know how. Like, don't learn it like it's okay to cry. Like, I love that you did acknowledge that you're getting emotional. Like, got this okay, particularly in our work. And sometimes again, if you're women, you get emotional. There's solve that, right? Like knowing that it's okay to have your outlets. And I so basically when I was publishing, I worked in 15 countries, and in 6 months I did South Sudan, Somalia, and Afghanistan. I was a mess, and I'm quite happy to say I had vicarious trauma, and I hit a brick wall, and my husband recognized it, put me on the phone to my dad. Dad said, look, this is what's happening. I went, I had a fantastic organization, World Vision, supported me in getting counseling for 3 months. Don't get to that point, right? So then there was a fantastic psychiatrist whose name I can't remember, but she's written a book on burnout in development. And if anyone's starting out, I'll find it. She's actually sadly passed away from cancer, but it was like one of those little books that it's now in my backpack if I'm going traveling. So the quick answer is you don't, but don't get to the point where you've hit the brick wall to find out how you're dealing with it. And so now I know how to deal with it, particularly with a young girl now. I know it might take me, if I have a particularly big day, go out for a walk, have a little bit of time before I re-engage with her, So I guess it's like we probably all hit a brick wall in our career at some point in time. Learn how you deal with it, learn who your support system is, know that it's okay to hit the brick wall and be vulnerable. And I'll find the name of this book. It's Daniela Pieri or something. It is just one of the best, easy to read books on burnout. And I just say, if you're in international, like, read it, embrace it. And yeah, so it's because you do, it will hit you on just evenings like today. And that's fine.
Yeah, and on to that, Molly, really, the fact that you can empathize and really connect with the people that you're working with and they're working with makes you human. And that's what they want to know, that they're connecting with human beings. And you're not just a technocrat, or you're not there just to, do a career. It's actually you care. And that don't lose humanity.
I remember I was in Ethiopia working on FGM, and I shared the story of me getting my first period. As a group of women, and we all shared, like, obviously very different stories. And I remember my colleagues came up and saying, what did you do? I was like, how can I be in a space and ask other women to talk to me about something, but I'm going to sit here being, I don't give something back. So again, it's like empathy and the giving back, and like you're there on equal footing, and we're learning, you're learning something all the time when you're sitting with people in that space. So yes, the empathy and the sharing, and you give of yourself because people give so much to you when you're in this space. And so important. So a whole lot of people in Ethiopia know about this period, And
I think as women in international development, we connect with those kind of topics. So a lot of the work around trying to stop cooking with firewood is actually about women going outside of these safety zones and potentially getting assaulted for collecting firewood. And I've heard those stories and it makes me cry every time. So I just don't hold back. Yeah. It hurts. Yeah. And there's a better way to do things, right? Yeah.
If I can add a bit, I've been around the sector a long time. I was on a project in Nepal with 100 corporate women who went to build houses. They were widowed, divorced, abandoned by husbands. They lived in, that one of the fortunate women we met lived on the floor of her brother-in-law's kitchen with her 2 children, and that was, she was really well off. So we went to build houses, and it was a really big project done over a few years. We just went for the first piece to build 10 houses. The thing that really moved me most when I was there was the power of a mobile phone. These ladies had, those little tiny Nokia phones that we had like 300 years ago. Definitely not smart, but those were it's what you said, the most powerful things in that community. They had, in one of the areas we worked, a group, and all of the women had a number on their phone. If their husband, their brother-in-law, started beating them, they'd push the button, or the next door neighbour would hear it and push the button, and immediately there would be 50 women outside surrounding the house with pots and pans, beating them and shouting and screaming and making it very clear that that woman wasn't on her own, and very quickly that man would stop what he was doing. And that was incredibly powerful, because at the beginning, a lot of those things were happening a lot of time, and as time went on, it reduced in number, because the men were then, as they walked around the community, very clearly targeted, or recognised, recognised as, being a lesser man. And it went with some community education, obviously, about what was and wasn't appropriate. But I think the other thing was, it also went with, who were these whitey women walking in, very privileged, coming to build houses for us. These women deserve no respect whatsoever in that community, but just being there gave them respect, and gave them recognition and going back sort of about 3 or 4 years later to do a similar project. Those women were leading in their community. They had shops, they had businesses, they had homes, and their children were going to school. So, yeah, the power of a little piece of technology was quite amazing to me. More questions? No. Oh, yeah.
I was wondering, how do we carbon offsets potentially put in social media? Yes, that's the reason why we built this tech, because of the trust involved. The Internet of Things device, which is connected to our cookers to prove that people are cooking, can demonstrate that carbon is being reduced from the firewood. And so there's a clever algorithm where we can equate the energy usage to carbon saved. And then we can use that as a way to have another market to pay for the system and support the subsidy of the system. So yeah, carbon market is one of our target markets in a roundabout way, and it's how it makes it sustainable for schools and refugee communities which can't afford these large devices. So great question. And if you know anybody in the carbon markets who can connect companies who want to buy carbon credits to a good cause, it's a premium product. It's very it's more expensive than most carbon offsets based on deforestation or just planting trees. It's a little bit different, but it's very targeted, focused on the social and health outcomes more than just an environmental outcome. So it's layered, and I think the carbon offset market needs to incorporate that and at a higher price, and people have to be aware of it and connect those. So yeah, it's a deeper question around carbon. The tech amazing.
One question.
Sure.
So I guess like all of you have like different career trajectories and stuff, but you mentioned like when you were like 27, you were sort of proposing different ideas, and I think especially as a woman of color, like did you encounter much resistance with the ideas that you were putting forward? Because I think that from my kind of experience, it's been quite frustrating because I know that I have the knowledge and experience, but it's not always being acknowledged when it comes to like recruitment processes. There's so many gatekeepers involved and like savior complexes and things like that. So I'm just really interested to hear, like, did you feel like your voice was heard when you were putting these ideas forward?
I've been very fortunate that I am born with a huge amount of pizzazz. I don't know what it is. I just I can step into a space and kind of I've been shy, but I've owned it. So sometimes I come into a space and someone goes, "Oh, can you get me some tea or coffee?" And I'm like, "Wow!" Or are you a student? Because I'm typically atypical in most steps. I'm a woman of color. I'm international most times. I'm an engineer, and people just don't, expect you in that space, and so they think you're another person. But I think as young women, or just women in general, of color or not of color, that the fact that your voice is so authentic, that you see it through a different lens and space, that is so powerful. I was sitting on an engineering committee, and they had a brochure for engineering women, or for engineering in general, sorry, as a career brochure. And I flicked through it. There was 20 pages. Not one page had a female in it. And I was sitting in this committee, I'm like, and I actually said, "Did you see anything wrong with this brochure?" And no one said that something technical, and like there is not one woman in it. And they're like, "Wow!" And I'm just like, the lens we sit on is so powerful. You need to own that lens, and make a hoo-ha if you can. But I was respected. There was some challenging questions of who am I to tell a 6-year-old or a very sandstone university what they should be doing. But we need to push those boundaries to change the world and make it what we want to see. Have you guys had that experience? All the time.
Yeah. yeah. I think find your allies and advocates, right? Because it's often not just a singular, but it's a collective fight. So, myself as a co-founder, my husband is my co-founder as well. And when we walk in the room, there is this perception that who is the CEO and like what is the role. And I think that when you find those allies around you, it really does help for the different personalities, because I think there's there's the quiet, the not so quiet in everyone. So it's just a matter of I don't know. It's a constant battle, but coming from Canada and seeing multiculturalism and seeing that it can be done well, I have aspirations for this.
Right. I think Krista said, well, mentorship is a huge difference. So I alliance myself with really key people in international development, typically white male, but they who are advocates of young females in this space. And they've opened doors that I never known existed. And just because of the passion that you have, they see that you have a place. So, your passion will go a long way to changing that space.
A question for Anna, more out of curiosity, whether you know the program Safe Plus? Yes. There are incredible synergy opportunities there for you.
Definitely, thank you.
Do you want to tell us what it is?
I'll try. So the idea around it is it's a joint UN, is it actually UN? No, it's possibly on the, actually, looked it up as I was talking. I worked on a Safe Plus program in Bangladesh, in the refugee camps. So it's a joint initiative by FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, IOM Migration, UNHCR and WFP. And in essence, the concept is to tackle climate mitigation through cleaner cooking energy, climate adaptation through environment and ecosystem rehabilitation, and climate resilience for vulnerable refugee and host communities. And as far as I know, for the program list that I worked on, and I understand that was globally, was still LPG based, which clearly is a much better solution than particularly in the refugee camps in New Cox's Bazar. There were, at the time that I arrived in 2018, there were women and children were cutting down the equivalent of about 4 football fields per day.
Significant, isn't it?
Yeah, of mostly green wood. So it's an incredible impact on the health of women and children who were the majority of the refugees in those camps, and exposing them to obviously gender-based violence as well as risks of trafficking, which are fierce in that area. So that was my curiosity, because as you started speaking, and I thought, oh my gosh, this, because LPG is great, but clearly it's not the solution. It's a probably much better interim solution, but so yeah.
It's a multi-agency kind of problem, because energy doesn't fall in any of the UN clusters. It falls between the holes, and no one owns it. So that's a challenge of half of these problems, right? When it falls through holes and no one owns it. Yeah.
Right. I also just a question. No need to go too technical. Just no, just like it's for my information more than anything. But in the space of trying to improve energy from potentially LPG or other sources, I know there's other kind of bioenergies coming out, and you spoke earlier about biomass as part of fuel production. Are you speaking about those as well, or kind of like
biogas?
More of the just like charcoals and woods?
Definitely.
I feel like the reason I say not too technical is not because I don't want to hear it, but just I feel like it's a very big space. So we can go into any more detail there.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a huge space for bio solutions. There's biogas from waste products, and then you can break down that matter, and that waste product becomes fertilizer. And so that's a full cycle of gas used for lighting and cooking, or generating energy for a motor. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of more cleaner fuels coming through. That's and also renewable energy. The batteries you got to shoot.
Yeah, right. Okay. So the whole space.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you should be on it. Love it.
Hey, good. We're going to have time for a few more questions afterwards, no doubt, as we're having a glass of wine. But I just want to say thank you. We have a very small gift for you, which Yunri is going to show you as speakers. You get to
Show people in the crowd.
you get to take, don't open the others, but you'll get to take home your very own Women in Development mug. We really, really appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge and your experience, and we appreciate that you come along, and as always there's lots of questions. We will be, this is recorded and we will be putting it on the internet before too long, as long as the sound recorded okay this time. It takes a few weeks with our wonderful IT guru in Scotland, Sam, who will do that. We'll remember tomorrow's the day of the girl and we'll celebrate. We have a couple of questions for you at the end. Yunri is going to share with you a list of topics that we're thinking about next year. And we just like you to take a pen and tick a few off, or add new ones of things you would like to hear. We run 4 programs a year, sometimes 5, depending how much demand there is. So you'll have that. The other thing we have is a campaign called #WomenInAid Wednesday, which we put on our social media, and we really love you to take one of those forms and send it, email back to us. It's for us to have an inspiring, interesting quote from you that's your view on the world and how things can be improved by women, how you can inspire other women. And I've already picked up a few quotes from this evening from these ladies, but I'll be asking them to do it again. And what we do is we highlight you, your face, your name, where you come from, and your quote. And they come up on a Wednesday. Keep an eye out for them, because they come from people who are new to the sector, people who are senior in the sector, and they come from people from outside the sector who are just jolly inspiring women. So we'd love you to do that. Next year, as I say, you've got a list of topics, tick a few off, or give us something new. We always have lots of different ideas. And I wanted to just highlight that in terms of the trauma, we actually had a really great session which focused on mental wellness and dealing with stress in this sector. And there was a fantastic psychologist who works with a number of organisations, and I will ask for that connection, but we'll give you those connections too if you need them. And I think that one of the critical questions that came out of that is the question you have to ask your organisation if they're sending you overseas: how are you preparing me to go, and how will you support me when I come back? Because that is vital. It's a real cultural, huge cultural impact when you come back into the community and you're paying for a coffee the same as will support a family for a month.
That's called shocks.
Massive. So that was a really interesting one, I have to say. We have a mentoring program. The next round, we've just started one round. The next round will be sort of February, March next year. It's a little flexible given how quickly mentors come in. Every single woman in this room is a possible mentor. You don't have to be all CEOs. Yunri, you're doing your degree. There'll be young women out there who are thinking about doing that degree and would like to know, is this something that is a good one to do? So everybody from every aspect, we'd love to welcome you, and we make sure that we try and match you up with the appropriate people. We're thinking we might do a Christmas drinks. I talked to Joel earlier, that would be a joint one, maybe, if not, we'll see you February, March. And thank you to Eliza, who's going to be our second volunteer in Brisbane, along with Yuri. And if there was somebody else who felt like, you know, a bit of volunteering is very easy. You just come to a meeting prior, you talk about what we're planning to do, come up with ideas of speakers, always a challenge, and then come along on the night and hand out wine. Yeah, it doesn't get any better than that, I have to say. But thank you all for coming. Do not run away, there's still wine out there and still a bit of food there, although it might be a little cooler than it was before. And can I just ask you all to say thank you to these amazing speakers, fantastic information that they've given us, and really appreciate sharing that, your time. Don't move. Please don't anyone move. I absolutely will be murdered by our comms coordinator if I have not taken pictures. And I have to say it wasn't pretty last time when I person. I get in a huge trouble. Okay. Thank you.
I know, it's like I can't.
Wonderful. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Yes, it's